Hi everyone, Evan Alexander here with another Cinema4d tutorial. Today we're going to talk a little bit about animation. My buddy Marissa, who's a production designer, reached out to me and was asking about doing fly-throughs through some of her sets. And I thought maybe this would be a good tutorial. So let's take a look. I'm going to preface this by saying I am not an animator. It's a real art form. There's a lot of subtleties of camera movement and timing and editing and all these things that I just don't really do in my day-to-day. But I know how to move a camera around a little bit, and so I can get you started. And then you can deep dive deeper into the YouTubes if you need to go further. So I have this really simple little scene here. This is like a little showcase for some furniture that I built a while ago. And I thought maybe we could just kind of zip through it and you can see what's going on. So we're in Cinema4d. We're going to use the Corona render engine today, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. This is going to be pretty cinema specific. So I think the concepts will be the same no matter what render engine you're using. So I'm going to try to have us kind of fly through here, maybe out into the courtyard and zoom off into space here somewhere. So let's jump in. The first thing we need to do is we need to create a spline. And the spline is going to act as the kind of track, the guide, the path for our camera. So I'm going to come up to the spline menu here. I'm going to add an empty spline. I'm going to make sure that I'm in point mode here. And then I'm going to hold Control, because I'm on Windows here. I'm going to hold Control and just click and just start to kind of lay in some kind of path here. It does not need to be perfect because we're going to go back and edit it later. So that's fine. All right, let's see what we've got. What I might do is just take this big cherry blossom tree here and hide it so that we can actually see what's going on. So here's our spline kind of roughed in. Already I can tell that it's a little chunky, so why don't we come in here and we won't go crazy here, but I think we can definitely kind of clean some of these curves up here. Just telling in ground plan view here to see if we can kind of just make this a little smoother, a little sexier here. I'm not going to obsess over this, though I could. That looks pretty good. And then, I don't know, this one looks a little kind of funky. And this one, I think also looks a little harsh. So smoothness, I think, is the name of the game here, right? So, all right. So we've got our spline. So this is the general idea. The camera's going to come, it's going to kind of fly between the chairs here, through the window, out and away. There we go. And we'll call this camera spline. Very original. Okay, so let's come in here into the room. Now you'll see the spline is on the floor. And so since this is going to guide our camera, we probably don't want it to be actually sitting on the floor. Obviously, we'll have to fine tune this a little bit, but for now, let's just raise this up a few feet off the ground here. Just going by eye first. I think it's better to get everything kind of roughed in and then go back and fine tune it, right? It's a really parametric process here, so don't stress too much. Just get it going, and then you can really kind of refine it. So. All right, we already have a camera here, but let's pretend like we didn't. So let's get rid of that, and we'll come in here and we'll get kind of close to our starting place. Doesn't really matter, but for now, and then let's just make a camera. Okay, we're gonna look through that camera. Sure, 36 millimeter. That looks great. I love it. So. Okay, here's the idea now. So now what we need to do is basically attach the camera to the path. So I'm going to choose my camera object here. I'm I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to come to animation tags and I'm going to choose this guy right here called Align to Spline. And when I do that, it's going to add a tag here, an Align to Spline tag. And nothing has changed because now it's looking for a spline. So if I take the camera spline here and just literally drag and drop the spline into this list, you'll see that all of a sudden the camera has jumped, right? And if we look at this in plan, now you can see here that the camera is now at the very beginning of the spline. Now, within the Align to Spline tag, where we added our spline here, so there's also a slider from 0 to 100% called Position. And so when we move this, now our camera starts to go from the beginning to the end of the spline. So this is great because what this means is we can just animate this one slider to kind of set up our camera moving through. And like I say, you can make this really complicated and get into multiple cameras and do handing things off and change your depth of field. And we're going to just stay really simple right now. So, okay, so this is working. So that looks pretty good. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the camera is just constantly facing forward here. And so it's following the path, but it's always kind of looking at whatever this angle is. So that's not great. We want to kind of follow the flow of the curvature. And so that is this little checkbox here called tangential. And when I click that, now what's happening is now the camera is going to stay perpendicular to the spline. And so as we move along it, you'll see that now the camera is going to start to actually kind of follow this curve around. So this is great, right? And so we can just animate the camera along this path here. And, you know, we don't have to worry about, I don't know, animating all these different kind of objects, right? We can just kind of focus on this one thing here from start to finish. Now, like I say, this is still parametric. So if I came in here to the spline, right, and I can really, you know, still kind of work this. So if I were to, you know, kind of, let's say maybe I want it to swing like a little bit wider here and maybe be a little bit softer. Maybe we want it to come really like close to the chair. And like I say, this is where, you know, animation is a real science and a real art form. And I leave it to the pros to do it. But here, so now we're going to come in. Oh, yeah, very dramatic. We're going to kind of whip around and we're out of here. Okay. So that's the basic idea. Okay. So that's great. And then we would animate this. And so next we'll talk about how to animate it. I do want to talk about one more thing here before we move on to actually animating, which is that maybe you want to move through the room, but you don't necessarily want to follow the path. For example, maybe you want to kind of lock in on one object as you're moving through the room. Like if this was a product shot for this chair, you might want to be moving through space, but you might want to be kind of focused on the chair. So how do we do that? Well, we can give the camera a target. So I'm going to right click on the camera again, and I'm going to, again, come to the animation tag, and this time I'm going to choose target. And so that'll add this little bullseye tag here. And so now we're going to use the align to spline to follow the motion of the camera. But the target is going to fix us onto like what we want to look at. So you could just pick an object here. So for example, I could just grab this chair and drag and drop it into this target object and it will stay fixed on that. Today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to make a new null. I'm just going to make a blank null and I'm going to call that target, right? It's this button right here, null. And so now this, right? So this is like, this isn't real geometry. This is just a point in space. It's just an X, Y, and Z that that Cinema will kind of understand. If you use Vectorworks, this is like similar to like a locus point, right? So this, I can put this wherever I want. And if I take the word target, let's come back to the target tag here. So it's looking for a target object. So again, I'm going to drag and drop the word target into the field, and you'll see immediately the camera snaps, right? So if we move the target, anywhere we move the target, the camera is gonna follow, right? So let's put, there's this stone here in the water. Let's put the target like right, yeah, you can even do up and down, like right on the rock, okay? So now as I start to move my slider through, you can see here that we're always focused on that target. It even spins the camera around for us as we kind of exit the building. So now this gives you options because you can animate your camera. You can also, of course, animate the target. So you could be moving along this spline and your target could be moving, or could be another animated object if you have a character that's walking or a car that's moving. Again, we're going to stay schmooper simple here today. So that's the idea. So let's say that we love this. We've got it all set up and this is, you know, kind of looking really nice here. Okay. So now how do we actually like get this into some kind of animation form? So at the very bottom of Cinema here is the animation toolbar. I probably have the wrong name for that, but this is showing us our frames. So by default, we have 90 frames. And also by default, let's see if I get this right here. No, that would be the preferences. Here we go, our system information, our project information. By default, we are going to render and working at 30 frames per second. So, right, 90 frames. So this is about 3 seconds here of time, which goes quickly. So, but let's set it up here and then we'll adjust the timing, right? Because the time is what's going to directly control the speed of the camera, right? We know we want the camera to move all the way along the spline. So if we want to speed it up, we would have it move over that spline in less frames. And if we want to slow it down, we would have it animate over more frames, right? So we're starting here at 0. And so what we need to do is we need to set our starting keyframe for the camera, right? So I'm going to come back up here to align to spline. We have our position tag here at 0%. Sorry, our position slider in the align to spline tag. And just to the left of the word, you might have noticed this in all of Cinema, there are these little diamonds. These are for setting keyframes. So this is for animation. So I'm at frame 0. My position is 0. I'm just going to click on this once and it'll turn red. So what's happened now is I've actually dropped a keyframe in here. So now I'm going to move ahead in time. I'm just going to grab this purple little buffer bar here, this handle. I'm going to slide us all the way to the 90. And now, right, so now we're set up for at the 90th frame. I'm going to go ahead and just move this all the way to the end here. And now you can see how my little red diamond has turned orange. So this means that something has changed. You've set a keyframe and now a parameter has changed. So it's kind of an open keyframe. So now I'm going to click on this again and I'm going to kind of finish that motion. So now I've basically dropped in these 2 keyframes. If we were to go to the window menu here and open up what's called our dope sheet, you will see that now here is a kind of representation of our 90 frames. And this is showing us that we have a keyframe here and we have a keyframe here. If I twirl this open, you can see that all we've really affected here is position. But if I was affecting things like the lens, the millimeter of the lensing, or anything else that I was animating, if we were moving the target, then that would kind of show up here as well, okay? And so this now, if you kind of worked with After Effects at all, this is the idea of like, now this is our layer, our position layer, and we can like move this around the timeline, we can compress it, we can expand it, you know, we can kind of ease in and ease out. We can do all these different kinds of things to the animation. So let's just see what we have here. Let's just go ahead and I'm just going to slide this out of the way for a moment here. So if we go back in time here, right? So these are our playback controls. So let's go to the start. So if I just hit play right now, you're going to see that now, right, as it's just going to keep looping over and over and over again. Right, you can see here that this is just kind of cycling through, right? And so what it's done is it's connected our keyframes into an animation. Now, as you can see by the fact that you're probably getting nauseous watching this, that 90 frames, 3 seconds is really fast because this whole thing, let's stop this before I throw up, because the camera is now moving, you know, hundreds and hundreds of feet through space in the time of just 3 seconds. So how do we add more time to this? So right here, the default is 90, but I can come in here and make this whatever I want. So let's say 300. And if we were to now come back to our dope sheet here, you can see it looks like nothing has changed. But if I zoom out, so now this is kind of cool. It uses the same navigation as you would use in your viewport. So like 1 to pan and 2 will let you kind of zoom out. 3 will let you orbit, but of course you can't orbit on a timeline. So, but I can zoom out here, and so you can see here, right, that now we've got 300 frames, right? And so if we're going to follow that path at 30 frames a second, at 300 frames now we're at 10 seconds, right? So I can grab these endpoint keyframes here, right? And once they're laid down, I don't need to redo them because now I can move them here in time. Same thing, if you want, you could move the start so it wouldn't necessarily start at the beginning of your animation. We'll keep it there for now. So now you can set this up. So really what I've done now is I haven't changed the animation, but I've just stretched it out over more time, right? And so let's get rid of this. Let's back up here. And so now if we play, so now you can see, you know, we're still moving pretty fast and we're still kind of herky-jerky, but you get the idea, right? So to slow it down even more, you would have to just add more and more frames, right? Also, I probably don't need the tail end of this animation. So this is where it's up to you to really kind of play and tweak and tweak and tweak, right? Obviously, the more frames you have, the longer it's going to take to render, right? So, okay. So how do we render this out now? So this is looking pretty good, right? And so if I just scrub along here, right? So I can manually kind of come along here if I want. So if I just kind of come along here at any point, I can stop. Now we can, you know, check along the way here. So Corona's already set up, lighting's already set up in the scene. So I'm not checking my animation. I'm still just doing a still rendering from this point along the way. So if you want to kind of check very specific, you know, vantage points along the way, or if you have lighting that's moving and kinetic or changing along the way, you know, you basically, before you render out the animation, you want to kind of come through into a few of these key moments in time and just do a quick kind of still render here to kind of, you know, check and test out and make sure that things are looking the way you want, right? So this is just our usual kind of normal, you know, workflow for stills at this point, for just kind of checking a few points into the render. So obviously there's a lot to be fixed here, but we're not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to let you do that on your project. We're going to keep kind of moving along. So, all right, we've done a few tests along the way. We think things look kind of great. So that's good. We can get rid of this. And so let's go back to the beginning. So now let's go back here to our render settings, okay? So we're in Corona. We have our output size here, right? And our aspect ratio. I've already got this dialed in. You should adjust this to be whatever you want. And by all means, please do this first so that when you're setting up cameras and framing things, you're looking at things in the right proportion and in the right kind of scale. And so that's good. Now under output, it says frame range current frame, okay? So that's why when we hit render or use the instant renderer in Corona, it only renders one frame, like wherever you are in time, because the render setting here is set to current frame only, right? Or on frame 217. So it's only going to render from 217 to 217. So what we need to do is change this to either manual if you want to do part of it or all frames. So I'm going to say all frames. So now it's set up where it wants to render from frame 0 all the way to frame 300. So that's great. Now, here's another issue that's kind of specific to Corona, right? Corona is a progressive renderer. So what that means is it will calculate the light and then it'll just keep refining the image over and over and over and over. And it'll just keep working indefinitely to get rid of the grain to a point where you feel like it looks good, and then we hit stop on the render, and there you go. So if this render is going to keep refining forever, how is it ever going to know that this frame is done and to move on to the next frame, right? So we need to tell Corona when to stop and when this frame is kind of good enough, right? And so if you're using Redshift or if you're not using a progressive renderer, then this is not an issue. But specific to Corona, this is an issue. So I'm going to come back here. I'm still in the general settings of the Corona render options here, the render settings. Thank you. And right here under progressive rendering limits, you can either set the number of passes, you can set time based on seconds, minutes, or hours, or you can use what's called like the acceptable noise level limit. So here's what I encourage you to do. I encourage you, while you're still in kind of current mode or current frame, to do a few tests. So render out a few of those frames and stop it as soon as you feel like it looks acceptable. And you can still use the denoiser, so that will help you. And so figure out how many passes you need to get to an acceptable level. So I tested this before, and I figured out that 6 with the denoiser turned on was an acceptable level. And so what that means now is that it's going to start rendering. It's going to do 6 passes on frame 1, and then it's going to move on to frame 2. And just so you know, 6 passes is probably not enough if you're doing a final animation for a client or a thesis or whatever you're working on. But today we're just going to keep it kind of light and quick. So you have to do a little bit of experimenting and work here to figure out what your pass limit is, or time, though I encourage you to stick to pass limits to kind of stay consistent. So that's good. And then the other thing is, because we always get a little bit of noise, no matter how clean we kind of get the scene, when you start stitching frames together, right? All an animation is a bunch of stills kind of sewn together, right? So if I come here to our secondary GI UHD cache, you've probably never even dug around in here. But that's okay. So under these presets, we're set to still frame because that's what we usually do. I suggest you come in here and just pick animation flicker free. And what this is going to do is this is going to help us to get a smoother, kind of less grainy or less kind of dancing render out of Corona. What the hell am I talking about? Basically, you end up with a little bit of noise in each frame. So, and that noise is going to be different in every frame. So if the noise is kind of bouncing around your screen, it's going to make it look like something's flickering or kind of quivering and weird. So this is going to help kind of smooth it out. Okay. Again, this is all specific to the Corona render engine. If you're using Redshift, you have to deal with kind of different parameters based around this, or Arnold or Octane or whatever your renderer of choice is. All right, we're getting very close, people. So now we've got our output size set. We have our resolution set. We have our frames set. We have Corona set up to do number of passes and to do some flicker-free animation. So now we need to come to the save option here and choose where and how we're going to save this out, right? So format here, it defaults to an 8-bit TIFF, okay? So if I click on this, you can see if you want, you can do an animation directly out of Cinema. So if you want to do an MP4 or an AVI or WMV, you could do all of that right here. And obviously, if you're on a Mac, you're going to have some different options here. Probably MOV QuickTime is where you would go. Weirdly, I actually render out TIFFs. Not weirdly, I think that's pretty standard fare. And here's why. What I do is I will render out a sequence of TIFFs. And so it's not really an animation. It's going to be 300 stills. I'm going to take that into After Effects, and that's where I'm going to kind of stitch that together. That's going to be like a whole different tutorial, but just so you know, this is my kind of standard way of doing it. Because usually I want to go into After Effects and do some kind of Photoshop-y post work, like a curves adjustment, or I want to add a piece of text with my name on it or the name of the project on it, or a watermark that says, like, you know, preliminary, do not send to client, or whatever it is. And then the other advantage of this is if I screw up part of my rendering, my animation, and let's say, you know, at the end, I'm not happy with the way something's working out, I can fix it and only render that smaller kind of range of frames and then just kind of stitch all of that together in After Effects without having to re-render the entire sequence again. Okay, so think about this a little bit. You may need to do a little bit of research into like After Effects and how that all works. But if you're just trying to bang out a quick fly through, choose one of these prefab guys and life is good. Here I would probably go with MP4. If I was on Mac, I would choose MOV. Anybody who knows anything about animation right now is probably cringing. So there you go. Not an animator, people. But we do need to tell it where to save this. So let's come in here and I'm just going to say tutorials here, align to spline. So I'm going to make a new folder and I'm going to call this animation 1. And then I'm going to jump into that. And then let's just call this animation 01. And what this will do is I hit save. And so now it's going to, in that folder, it's going to render out those passes and it's going to kind of drop them all in there. And so it'll just keep adding like a 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4 kind of to the end of the file name. Yeah, we're all over the place today, people. And that's it, really. So now, and you want to make sure that you've really got this all kind of set and great and that everybody's really happy. And then you would, just like normal, you would hit, you know, render. Just because this is a nice tutorial and I don't want to take a million years here. I'm going to like stupidly dumb down these settings just to kind of keep things moving along here. Okay. So now I have everything set. I think we're good. And so now if I just hit Shift R here, right? Or come into render and render to picture viewer. Where are you? Render to picture viewer. And then off we go. And you can see here, right? It started this animation. And right now it's rendering the first frame. It's preparing our scene data, right? So it still has to do all this stuff like calculating GI and all the things, right? So this is the kind of thing you have to keep in mind with animation. If it takes you 20 minutes to get a nice clean render out, oh look, you can see the light, isn't that pretty? If it takes you 2 hours to get your final frame down, and you're trying to do that then in an animation, you're gonna die, right? Because it's just, think about it, it's 30 frames a second. It's going to take you, and let's say it takes an hour per frame. It's going to take you 30 hours to render 1 second worth of animation, right? So you need to really study optimization. You need to make things as simple as possible. You need to make things as kind of small as possible. This is a completely different philosophy than how we work for our usual kind of set design renderings, where we don't really care about how big it is and how, kind of long it takes, because we're just rendering one. So animation is a little bit of a different beast, right? And so you can see here that what's happening is it's building each frame. Now this is taking 27, 26, 25 seconds per frame. That is, again, you can see how kind of grainy and small and ugly these are. So, right, this is not how I would output this for a client. So rendering animation takes a long time. This is one of the main reasons why I don't do it, because it's just really slow. If you're really getting into it and you really want to do this, then by all means, please look at render farms, right? You can pay to upload to their server bank of, however many computers you can afford to pay for, render it out, and then download, the files kind of, back to you. So I'm just going to show you here real quick. If we come back here into, where are you? Our Windows Explorer, tutorials, align to spline, animation. So you can see here that's what's happening, is that it's as each frame gets rendered, it just keeps adding them in and adding, a number to them. And so this will just keep going all the way through all 300 frames. And that's great. Also, while this is animating here, there's this little tiny playback here. So is that right? Is this going to play for me? Am I crazy? I think it's too much going on where I'm zooming. In theory, it will try to play you back kind of a cycle through what you've already kind of rendered while you're doing it here. I think between doing this, I have a bunch of other stuff open on my computer and we're recording, that it's just kind of dying. But there you go. And I think that's it. Boy, there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the general idea and concept behind it. So I'm going to stop this because we don't need to do it. I think maybe now that I've stopped it, you can see here. Yeah, so it's trying to kind of cycle through these rendered frames to show me. Isn't it beautiful? So there you go. I just want to show you one more thing here. I do have another quick kind of scene set up here. This is great for like flying through space. If you just want to kind of showcase an object or one object, you can, well, obviously you could just put a camera on it and animate it spinning around. But also here, I've done the same align to spline and target kind of situation, but my spline is just a circle spline here. And so now if we were to kind of move our position here, you can see that what's happening is that basically we're just really circling around our object. So at the very least, right, if you need to just show off a prop or part of a design, or you could even do this inside of a room, I just have it set up here to just kind of spin around. So, all right. This is a really bad animation tutorial, but hopefully it gives you some idea of the basic principles for kind of moving, within. I think you're going to find that you need to really think about optimizing and about ways that you can kind of simplify your design. Maybe you have to render it out as a white model. Maybe you need to do a smaller size. So just, experiment and play around with it. Hope that makes some sense, and I hope that helps. All right. Good luck, Marissa. Talk to you soon.